thank you very much for joining this Friday talk here at the museum. Also, thank you for those that are watching us on streaming and those that are not still able to watch it now, but will watch later on in YouTube. I have the task of introducing Nuria Galiana. I think most already know Nuria. She did BSc Licenciatura in Barcelona, at Autonomous University of Barcelona, in environmental sciences. Then she stayed at the same university and did a master's degree in terrestrial ecology and biodiversity management. When she finished her master's, she went on to France and she did a PhD based in the Pyrenees in a research center from the CNRS, which is equivalent to the CSIC in France. And they have a research center right up in the mountains in a small village, very nice place. And she did a PhD there, jointly registered at the University of Toulouse with José Montoya. Then she stayed for a little while and did a postdoc with Michel Leroux, the same kind of topics that she's going to talk today. At some point she wrote me and said, I would like to join, come to Madrid and do a Marie Curie, and would you support me? And of course I said yes. The topic is of great interest to me as well. So she applied and she got the Marie Curie. And last year she also got a very prestigious award, L'Oréal UNESCO Women for Science Award. Was 5 awards given in Spain for young female researchers, and Nuria got one of them, and it was the only one that got in environmental science and biodiversity. Everything else was in other topics, so congratulations again for that. It was very good, a little bit of money to the research as well. So today she's going to talk about interplay between species distributions and the biotic interactions. This is the main theme that Nuria addresses. Very strong background in theoretical ecology and community ecology, but trying to understand those patterns of communities at geographical scale and often scaling up to biogeographical scale, which is not many people do that. So that's one of the that's one of the niches of Nuria, and she's going to delight us today with her talk. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Miguel, for the introduction, and thank you, everyone, for coming. As Miguel said, I will be talking about the interplay between species distributions and their biotic interactions. And I would like to start by posing this very basic question. What are ecological communities? Are they a loose collection of species, or are they an interconnected set of species interacting with each other? I believe that nowadays everyone agrees that species interact, but in fact they are embedded in complex networks of trophic interactions, like the one I'm showing you here, where every point or node, it represents a species, and every link represents a biotic interaction. And this notion of understanding species as an entangled bank is not new. Darwin in 1859 already stated that species are bound together in complex webs of interactions. And here you can see the 2 first visual representations that we are aware of food webs. They are, of course, much more simple than what we can find now in the literature, but they already conceptualize this notion of understanding ecological communities as networks of species interacting and affecting each other. And network theory has this basis on graph theory. And I would like to very briefly talk about the origins of graph theory, because I think it allows us to understand how taking an abstract representation of a system in a form of a graph can help us to extract generalities of the system. So the origins of graph theory was established by Euler, and what he wanted to do, the problem that he stated, was to devise a walk through this city. What you're seeing here is a city that would cross all the bridges, which are the things that you're seeing in green, but only once. The walk could not go through the same bridge twice. And what he did is to take this abstraction of the city and transform this as a graph where each node represents a part of the city. So you see here, this is one part of the city, this is another part of the city, so on. So you have 4 parts of the city, and the edges or the links represent the bridges that connect these parts of the city. So by doing that, he realized that the problem had no solution because the nodes, all the nodes had an odd number of interactions, and that's a generality. And that was establishment of graph theory, and now it's a known field of mathematics. And now many fields, different fields, in ecological networks as well, we can borrow tools from graph theory to understand how ecological communities are structured. And so what are these tools? I'm going to briefly present a few of these metrics that you can measure from a network so that you can have an idea of what kind of things we look at. Again, here the nodes represent the species and the links represent biotic interactions. And for instance, one of the things that you can start looking is whether there are hubs or keystone species, which are those nodes here, which are those nodes in the network or in the community that have the capacity to highly influence the whole ecosystem because they have many interactions or because they are strategically connected to other. And a classic example of these keystone species are the wolves of Yellowstone. Many of you know the example, but just in case you don't, it's this story. You won't have the time to read everything there, but it's this story where the wolves were exterminated from Yellowstone, and then the system was close to collapsing, and then when they reintroduced the wolves, the system started to finding the balance again through the direct connections that the wolf had with other species and also the indirect interactions. So that's pretty nice. Another thing that it's very common to look at in networks is how complex the system is, how well connected the species are between them. And the metric to look at this is connectance, which is the proportion of realized interactions among all the potentials. And connectance and the complexity has been related to different aspects of the stability of the system. Another metric, for example, is network modularity that quantifies the compartmentalization of the system. A compartment here are represented by different colors. Different colors would represent different compartments. And a compartment is established when the species within each of these compartments interact more between them than with the species outside. And also this, a system or a community that has a modular structure has been also associated to the contention of perturbations because they are able to contain the perturbation within a module and avoid the propagation of the perturbation across the entire community. And another fundamental property that we look in networks is the degree distribution. And this metric is very important that it's well understood because we're gonna go through it later on in the talk. So I'm gonna try to explain it properly. So the degree of a species is how, here, for example, if we focus on this species in red, the degree is 5 because it's the number of interactions that it has with other species. And what we are seeing here is the cumulative degree distribution, which is representing the probability of finding a species in the community, the probability this is the probability of finding a species in the community that has at least this number of links. So the probability of finding a species with at least one link, it's 1. And this probability decreases as the number of links increases. So the probability of finding a species that has at least 30 links, it's very small. And what's interesting is that it's been shown in nature that with different systems, different kind of networks and interaction types, that there is a universality in the shape of this degree distribution, where you tend to find power law degree distributions, which means that most species in the community have few links, so we have many specialists, while only a few of them are generalists, have many interactions. And this seems to be pretty general. And this shape of the degree distribution, the power law shape, has been also associated to more robust communities. Okay, so these are different examples of network properties that we can look at, and many of them, they have been associated to the stability of the community and also to the functioning of the system. So the structure of the networks determines the dynamics and the stability, and also their functioning, like pollination or pest control. Okay, so the problem or the issue is that most network research has been, or ecological network research, has been focused at the local scale. So here, the orange represents network research, while the green represents biogeographical studies. And network research, as I said, has been focused mostly on local scales and more or less ignoring the effect of larger scale processes on the structure of ecological networks. On the contrary, biogeographical studies, they focus on large-scale patterns, and traditionally they have ignored the role of biotic interactions in determining these large-scale patterns. But we now have hints then that both the climate influences network structure and also biotic interactions influence biogeographical patterns. So the key, I think, is to try to integrate biogeography, spatial processes, and species interaction networks. And in the past, I worked a lot into how network structure biotic interactions. So yeah, this is a work that we published last year, and let's start with this first part. So as you probably all know, geographical range size is one of the major determinants of species vulnerability to extinction. So it's very important to understand what determines range size of the species. Traditionally, it's been thought that the species distribution and in turn species range sizes were mostly determined by the environmental niche. So a species that would have a small environmental niche, meaning that they have a narrow variety of environments where they can live and reproduce, they would have small ranges, while species that have wider environmental niches, they would be widespread. And as I said before, traditionally they ignore the role of biotic interactions in determining these species distributions and range size. However, the ecological niche of a species is a multidimensional niche. It's a multidimensional concept. And on one side, we have the Grinnellian niche, which focuses on the environmental aspects, as I just explained. But we also have the Eltonian niche that is focused on the role of biotic interactions. But, and this is what's usually been ignored for biogeographical patterns. And one of the reasons why this hasn't maybe been considered in biogeographical studies is because it's quite hard to get information on species interactions across large geographical scales. But now there is an emergence of geographical data on species interactions. We have new tools and approaches to infer interactions from species occurrences in space. So here, for example, this is just an illustration to say that from species occurrences, there are approaches using different kinds of filters to end up having a meta-web, which is the potential network of interactions across all the species that are in a region. But besides these new approaches, we also have the emergence of new large-scale data on interactions, actual data on sampled interactions. And so now that we have this new data and tools available, we can reassess the role of biotic interactions in determining biogeographical patterns. And in particular here, as I said, we are interested in looking at the role of biotic interactions in determining grain size. And what we did to do that is we characterized the environmental niche of the species and the diet niche or the biotic niche of the species. And what we did to characterize the diet niche of the species is that we use data on biotic interactions across large spatial scales. Concretely, we use this published data that sampled across the whole Europe this system of host parasitoids. Well, they have 3 trophic levels, but for the talk today, I'm going to use only these 2 trophic levels. And basically, the diet niche of the species, we characterize them as the number of resources a parasitoid is using. Okay, so we have the biotic niche or the diet niche, and we also characterize the climatic niche of the species. And what we did is to characterize the environmental conditions of all the sites in which a given species was present. So for example, a species that would be present in these points would have a narrow environmental niche, and a species that would be in all these yellow points would have a wider environmental niche, a climatic niche. And here I just put temperature, but in fact we used all the bioclimatic variables. So okay, once here is already result. Once we have these 2 components of the niche of the species, we looked at the relationship they had with species range sizes. Here, species range size is measured as the occupancy of the species, so in how many sites the species was present. And here, what we are looking at is the relationship with the climatic niche. So, as expected, and as we already knew, the species with wider climatic niches, they had larger ranges. This is not surprising, but we were more interested in looking at the diet niche of the species. So the relationship, to look at the relationship with diet niche of the species, we looked at the diet of the species at different spatial scales. Here, for example, is the total number of interactions it had across Europe. So species with wider ranges had more interacting species, but we also looked at the mean number of interactions in each local patch, and we see also that they did have more interactions locally, and also we looked at how different these interactions, the species that they were interacting, how different they were across sites, and they also had a larger variety of resources. So basically what we saw is that species with wider ranges, they were a kind of super-generalist species in terms of diet too, because they had more variety of interactions at the landscape scale, but also at the local scale. Okay, nice, but how do we infer causality? Because they are in more places because they are able to interact with more species, or they just interact with more because they are able to be in more places. Without knowing this, we would just be talking, I mean, not nonsense, but we wouldn't really understand what we wanted to understand. So what we did to characterize this is to perform a null model analysis. And this null model analysis consisted in checking for each species in how many sites the species was present. And then we randomly distribute each species across this given number of sites. And then we recalculated the climatic niche of the species and the diet niche of the species of these randomly distributed points. And then what we did is to compare the results obtained with the null model, which is the ones that you're seeing in orange here, with the real data, that is this. And here what we observe is that for the climatic niche, for the climatic niche of the species, we see that in the real data, the climatic conditions are more constrained than what they could be by chance if you look at the results of the null model. But so species have narrower climatic niche than expected by chance if it was only based on their range size. Now, if we look at the results of the null model for the diet niche, of course, we cannot compare the number of interacting species because in the null model, we cannot know if they would interact or not. But what we can look at is the number of co-occurring resources in the sites that were randomly distributed. And this is what we are looking here, with how many resources the parasitoids co-occurred in these sites. And what we see is that in the null model species, well, in the real data, which is here, the blue and the black dots, species have larger number of co-occurring species than expected by chance, which suggests that species are kind of maximizing the number of resources they co-occurring with. So yeah, to sum up this part, we saw that both climatic and the diet niche positively correlate with the species range size. Species with larger ranges had more interacting partners at all spatial scales, and this is what we call super-generalist species. I'm going to go into the importance of these super-generalist species later. So species that are able to interact with more species and also to be in more places. And the use of null model allowed us to identify that in this system, it seems like the diet dimension of the niche is more strongly limiting species range sizes. And in general, we've seen that integrating species interactions into biogeographical studies can help us understand better species distributions. And okay, yes, so now we've seen that this integration of considering species interactions into biogeographical studies can help us understand how they are distributed. But can we go the other way around? Can we extract information from species distributions about their interactions? So now this is the second part of the talk. And this is something that we published recently, and it's how to go from co-occurrences to biotic interactions. So I already mentioned this many times, but so sampling species interactions at large spatial scales is challenging. So this is, again, this figure, this is why many people are trying to infer interactions from different proxies. And here I'm going to present another approach that we did, which is to compare the network of co-occurrences with the network of biotic interactions to try to extract information. So the network of co-occurrences is built by, all this is using different data, 10 different data sets from different systems across the world. It's bipartite networks, plant pollinator or host parasitoid, and it's sampled interactions. So to build the co-occurrence network, what we did is to check in each sampling site the species that were co-occurring together. And if in one sampling site 2 species were co-occurring together, we would add a link in this co-occurrence network. And the biotic interaction network, it was sampled by scientists looking at species interactions. And if 2 species were observed interacting in a given site, a link would be seen in the network of biotic interactions. So what we did is to compare these 2 networks. And the first thing that we observed is that among all these potential interactions, when I talk about potential interactions, I'm referring at the interactions in the co-occurrence network. So among all these potential interactions in the co-occurrence network, we observed that about 20% of those interactions were actually realized in biotic interactions, in actual biotic interactions. And this was quite consistent across all data sets. And something even, I don't know if more interesting, but also quite interesting to me, is that what we observed is a shift in the degree distribution. So again, here we have the same plot as I was showing before, like the cumulative degree distribution, where we are seeing the probability of finding a species in the network where at least it has this number of links. And what we saw is that the shape of the degree distribution in the co-occurrence network had a random shape, while in the network of biotic interactions, it shifted to a power law degree distribution. And this is quite interesting because the random degree distributions are associated, I'm saying random and I meant to say exponential, sorry, exponential shape. But my brain tricked me because the exponential degree distributions are associated to a random distribution of links among the species. So in the co-occurrence network, we see that the distribution of link among the species seems to be random, while in the biotic interaction network, it seems to not be random anymore, but it shifts to a power law degree distribution, which is associated to robust communities. So this is quite interesting. And how can we have this shift, how the degree distribution can shift from the co-occurrence network to the biotic interaction network? And this is due to the super-generalist species I was talking about. And this figure can seem a bit complicated. I'm going to try to walk you through it slowly. So here we have the biotic interaction networks. And the biotic interaction networks, they give us information about the biotic niche of the species. And here we have the co-occurrence network, which is telling us about the abiotic niche of the species. So the co-occurrence network gives us the potential interactions, and the biotic interaction network gives us the realized interactions. And these super-generalist species are the ones that have many interactions in both networks. And the interesting thing is that to observe these shifts from exponential shape to power law, we need that this relationship between the potential interactions and the realized interactions, we need to have a superlinear increase of the realized interactions. So species with more potential interactions, so species that are able to be in more places and in turn to co-occur with many species, they need to also interact a disproportionately larger amount of those potential interactions. Okay, why? So we need this to happen. Why we need this? Because if if this proportion of realized interactions would be constant across all species, the shape of the degree distribution wouldn't change. It would just be shifted, but it wouldn't change. If species that are more generalist in terms of abiotic conditions would realize a less proportion of those links, so this green, what would happen is that this degree distribution, we would lose interactions from this part of the degree distribution. So it would shift like this. To obtain this shift in the, to have a power law and obtain this fat tail here, we need these super-generalist species to realize a larger proportion of those potential links so that the degree distribution goes flatter in this part, like poop, and we obtain this fat tail. I'm not sure if that was super clear, but I can talk about it more later. And okay, so we saw that this is what happens in data. So this is the example of one of the data sets. The black points are the data, the real data. And what's even more interesting, maybe, is that we were not only able to observe this, but to also propose a theoretical model that very simply accounted for this pattern. What you're seeing here in green is the results for the theoretical model. And it's quite a good fit, and for all the data sets, it's similar. And the model is the one that you see up here, where the probability of interaction between species alpha and I depends on how frequently these two species co-occur in space. Sorry, I thought I had some, like a summary thing, but so if two species co-occur more frequently in space, they will have a larger chance of interacting. And with the use of this model, we were able to extract community level properties, so network properties, without observing the network, just based on knowledge on the co-occurrences of species in space. So to sum up this part, we saw that about 20% of the species that co-occur actually interact. We also saw that how frequently these species co-occur in space determines how likely it is that they will interact. We saw the role of these super-generalist species that are able to be in many environmental conditions and also interact with many different species, and how important is this to promote the shift from exponential shape in the degree distribution to a power law degree distribution. And and we were able to infer network properties only observing the co-occurrences between species in space. And so to conclude, we saw that we didn't saw, but the emergence of new data and tools characterizing biotic interactions at large spatial scales can open the avenue for reassessing biogeographical patterns. This is something that I want to mention because it's very characteristic of almost all my research, is that the combination of theoretical approaches with data analysis, I believe it's fundamental to have a mechanistic understanding of the patterns observed. And and overall, I think integrating species interactions with spatial and biogeographical processes can bring new insights to understand species distributions and also community assembly. And that's it. Was it very short?
Brilliant talk. Thanks very much. Any question, comment? By the way, I think it's the tradition. You can make questions in English if you prefer, but you can also make in Spanish. We're in Spain after all. So, who wants to venture first? I know the topic is hard, Joaquin.
Hi, Nuria. Thanks for presenting those two nice works and for the introduction before. I think we may have talked about this before, but exactly how you measure range size in the first paper, just from the data set.
Yeah, it's just from the data set, and it's really the number of sites in which the species is present, and of course it can be limiting in the sense that it's just a number. It doesn't capture whether it's like wider or not. But
so the interactions are also those realized within that data set?
Yeah.
And also the climatic conditions are also measured within the data set?
Yeah.
Okay. What do you think will happen, because those sawflies are salix, are willow making galls, and they are widespread? I don't know exactly those species, but they are widespread. What do you think it will happen if you were using independent sets of data for measuring that? Do you think you will find exactly the same thing, or this relates with the second paper, or you will find a lower number of realized interactions? Because you weren't able to find those super-generalists, okay, in the first instance, and you find in the second when you have the wider range, isn't it?
But I did find the super-generalist in the first data.
Okay, that they were so super-generalist as you find in the second?
It's just that it's a different... Actually, yes, because the first data, the data that I showed in the first part is also used in the second part as one of the data sets, and it has the same patterns as the rest. It's just that in the first part I don't look explicitly at this pattern of realized versus potential, but it does have the pattern.
So going to that, do you think it will be actually show the same downtrend in terms of, the shifted relationship?
I guess so, because it's quite general across all the other data sets that I looked. The only thing is that with the other data sets, I don't have they don't look at large spatial scales, so I cannot do the same kind of analysis, so I'm not 100% sure, but I don't see why I wouldn't observe that. Yeah.
Thanks.
More questions? Yeah.
Hey, Nuria, fascinating talk, indeed. Do you have any sense, these are consumptive interactions, it's like predator-prey, basically, interaction, right?
Well, not really. In the second, it's host parasitoid.
Host parasitoid,
in the first part, and in the second part, there is host parasitoid and plant pollinator.
Oh, plant pollinator. Okay, so that's so that sort of answers my question, because I was wondering what is your sense of how general your patterns are to mutualistic interactions.
Yeah, to mutualistic interactions, it seems to work. What it's more challenging is for how to translate this into other, like, trophic interactions or food webs, because here it's bipartite networks, so you have like two very well-defined trophic levels, and actually these two types of interactions, they need to co-occur to actually interact. But in other kinds of interactions, like food, when you look into food webs, full food webs, you have other interactions that do not require co-occurrence to be able to interact, like competition, for example. So that's challenging. We haven't addressed that yet. Okay. So this.
Yeah, good, thank you.
A very nice talk. Thank you. The data sets, were they from Europe?
No, not all. In the second part, not all of them. There were some from Europe and some from other parts of the world, like Argentina. And,
okay, because I was going to ask you if you think that this pattern that you found would be applied to the tropics as well.
Yeah, there are data sets. Yeah, I mean, I only look at 10 data sets that are spread across the world, and they look all the same, but
Okay.
I didn't see any significant difference in the location, but I haven't looked into that completely.
Thank you for the super nice talk. So regarding the second paper you presented, you mentioned that if you have 20% of the species co-occurrent, then they're going to interact. That's what I took away, right? Or
The 20%, you mean?
Yeah.
From all the species that are co-occurring, about 20% will interact.
Yeah, okay. And then you tested this across several data sets, right? I was wondering how this percentage would change if you would take into account, I don't know, context-dependent factors, relative changes in relative abundance between the interacting species, and all these kind of things.
Yeah, I actually don't know, because for some of the data sets we don't have abundances, so we couldn't take that into account. And the percentages, they were quite constant across data sets. There was nothing that would indicate that a given context would be different, but I really haven't looked into that directly, so I don't know.
And these are binary networks?
Not all of them. Some of them are binaries. For some of them we have interaction strength, but
then you turn them into binary to test them?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. All these analyses are binary.
Yeah, because it would be nice to see what happens with weighted networks. And
Yeah, it would be nice. The thing is that it's not super clear to me how would you transform these, because the weighted networks, they are sampled locally. Yeah. But in order to do this analysis, I'm analyzing the network at the regional scale, because it's how I can compare with the co-occurrence network. And then I'm not super sure about how to transfer this interaction strength at larger spatial scales. Maybe just summing them up, or I'm not sure. But for sure, it would be nice to think how to take that into account.
Thanks.
I have a question. Okay.
Thanks, Nuria. So the power law relationship in the interactions, what does that mean in terms of the resilience of these communities to change compared with what you would have expected just from looking at the co-occurrences? Does it mean that the communities are more or less resilient to change?
Yeah, actually it's been shown not only in ecological networks, but in network theory in general, that power law degree distributions, they are more resistant to perturbations, because at least to random perturbations. Because since you have many species with a few number of interactions, a random perturbation, it's very unlikely that will affect the species that has many interactions. However, they might be more vulnerable to targeted attacks, because if the perturbation is targeted to this generalist species, then the system will collapse more easily. And yeah, but they are supposedly more resistant to random perturbations than the exponential shape, which is super interesting, because the random, as I said, the exponential degree distribution is when you have the links distributed at random among species, and this is what we observe in the co-occurrence interaction. So it kind of says that species that are co-occurring more or less randomly, I'm sure that's not true, but in terms of that network. But then there is like a filtering in which species are interacting with which that turns this into a power law degree distribution. And this is like a sign of community assembly. And I think that's super interesting.
I guess more widespread species tend to be more abundant, or at least Kevin Gaston would say so. And so is that why they have, another reason why they have more interactions within each community as well?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, so I'll fire my question and comment. So about 17 years ago, Alejandro Rosenfeld, who is Carsten Rabeck and myself, got together in Capsalines in Mallorca in an infrastructure of the CSIC and spent a week talking about these things. And we came up with a concept of co-occurrence network and wrote a paper published in 2009 in Ecological. And basically the idea is that the storyline is very simple to what you presented, right? And we don't know what the interactions are there. Can we extract information on interactions from coexistence, co-occurrence, and can we transform those co-occurrences into networks that then can be compared, right? But we didn't have any information on biotic interactions. So it was very theoretical, very conceptual, the paper. And in the discussion we said, well, species may co-occur and not interact. There's lots of reasons why that may happen, right? And this was, of course, one of the contentious issues in the review process. So when he came up with this and showing that 20% of those potential interactions based on co-occurrences were actually realized, and that was consistent across data sets, I was really excited. Well, 20%, but why 20%? Why not 40? And so my question is like to give you, the potential to speculate a little bit on why that might happen, why 20% and not 60 or 10, and whether that we think it's a universal pattern. Of course, you don't know, right? But what's your gut feeling about it? And if you had 1 million euros, how would you go about, find additional support for that inference?
Yeah. It's a bit mean because this is a question you do in all PhD defenses. This is not one of them. But so the 20%, I actually don't know. I don't know. I think there is a limit to how many interactions, biotic interactions, can be there, and it seems like the limit is finding this power law degree distribution, but. Actually, introducing interaction strengths might give us more information into that, because maybe some of them are just interacting very, not super strongly, but the 20%, I really don't have an answer for that. And €1 million, I don't know. I think I would like to I don't know if I need €1 million to do that, but I think trying to expand this and to incorporate other types of interactions and how to see what's the role of indirect interactions into all this, it's very important, because all types of interactions are essential for the community assembly. And here we are seeing a signature of community assembly only looking at one type of interaction, but I don't know how this would change when introducing other types of interactions. So I think extending this would be important. And also, now that we have this model that allows us to infer interactions just based on frequency of co-occurrences, we can start wondering how this frequency of co-occurrences will change with perturbations, like a habitat loss. And then if you perturb the system, removing habitat, and the species will co-occur less frequently, how is it going to affect interactions? All this, I think it's interesting.
Okay, if no more questions arise, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Let's give a round of applause.